and welcome back to another episode of Green Jeans. I am your one host, Annika Van Rossum. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm joined by my other co-host,
Maya Van Rossum, also using the pronouns she, her, and wish I was actually wearing green jeans, but I haven't gotten them yet. FYI.
We might start a fashion line. But if you haven't joined us before, we are a podcast that talks about important environmental and social justice issues from a generational lens, because I am a budding activist and my mom is a lifelong activist, or at least has been doing it many more years than I have.
I know I'm like have a funny look on my face because I don't think she gets to be called a budding activist anymore, seeing as she started her activism in elementary school. But we'll still go with that.
I don't know what to say, man. I don't know how else to describe it. I don't know how to be like, I've been like, we could numberize it. I've been doing activism for 22 years and my mom's been doing it for a number of years.
No, you haven't been doing that because you have to think about what age you were in elementary school when you started. It was approximately, well, yeah. Okay. We're not going to go down that.
Yeah. No. Anyway,
fact check time.
Yeah. So also, if you haven't joined us, we always do a weekly fact check, or most weekly fact check. Sometimes we forget, but that's okay. So Mom, what's our fact check for the week?
So I decided to take a look at what the Environmental Protection Agency has to share with us about electric vehicles. And so I'm bringing a fact check from the EPA. And I wanted to do this because, you know, when I was talking with Dave, my husband, your bonus dad, previous guest teacher on the show, you know, and saying, what would be a good fact check? And he, he reminded me that people are constantly challenging the value and importance of electric vehicles in addressing the climate crisis. And we hear all sorts of false arguments about electric vehicles and people, really the opposition, trying to rationalize how and why they should be able to continue to use their gas guzzling vehicle. Maybe it's not a gas guzzler, but if it's consuming gas, it's guzzling gas. So there you go. So anyway, so took a look at what the EPA has to say. And, you know, one of the things that we do here is that when you compare gas vehicles with electric vehicles and their consumption of the power, that electric vehicles have the same carbon footprint as gas vehicles because of the emissions and the ramifications of the extraction of the energy fuel from the earth. Now, let me be very, very, very clear. I oppose fracking and I oppose shale gas, natural gas, nothing really natural about it. Getting it out of the earth is a highly industrial process that has very serious ramifications. So want to be very clear about that. But when we are looking at the vehicles themselves, and we acknowledge and recognize that the power generation that comes from power plants most often these days continues to be power that's generated from fracked gas, from coal, from fossil fuels. Okay. And so even though when you look at that, when you look at the footprint of the electric vehicles, recognizing much of that energy is created by fossil fuels versus gasoline cars consuming a fossil fuel, which is gasoline, still, electric vehicles are demonstrably better for the environment and for the climate crisis. And their carbon footprint is dramatically better. The carbon footprint of gas vehicles is dramatically worse. The carbon footprint of electric vehicles is dramatically better. Now, exactly the difference is going to depend a little bit on how that energy is created. But writ large, across the board, you are doing better for the climate if you buy and utilize an electric vehicle. And you are doing even better for the climate if you're powering that electric vehicle with clean energy sources like solar panels, like wind turbines, which, as you know, Annika, our electric vehicle here at our house is actually powered by, because we have solar panels on our roof and we have an all electric house and we have geothermal in the ground to help with heating. For cooling, we use fans. So we don't really use it for the cooling, but it would be there for the cooling if we wanted it to be. And so when you think about, what we're driving around, it's even dramatically better for the earth. And as we create more and more clean energy options for electricity generation, then people who are buying and using electric cars are going to be doing better and better for the environment, for the climate crisis, and for future generations. So electric vehicles, good.
Yeah. I
so what is it
like? I don't have anything to add to it. I mean, like, yeah, you're right.
And in fact, I did want to remind people that we did a really great episode with Karen Faraday talking about a company called Nicero, which is, a peddling another false climate crisis solution, where they're actually talking about doing, all the ills of the world, extracting fracked gas from the earth and then turning it into gasoline that people will burn in their gasoline powered vehicles as a way to perpetuate both gasoline powered vehicles and fracking. So for anybody who didn't, hasn't been following us for a while, go back and look for that episode. Karen Faraday, Better Path Coalition, and the Nicero false climate solution show. That's a really interesting one, and just shows you how the industry really continues to try to dupe the people in order to perpetuate their dirty fossil fuel footprint.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's just the problem with a lot of this stuff, is always too, like, when you see, if anyone's seen like those natural gas commercials, I don't know what they are now, but I remember there's one in college and it was like really trying to hit your dopamine with all the like flashy images, and it was like clean science, blah, 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 blah. And it was like, just goes, at the end, I remember watching and being like, oh man, I thought it was going to be like some cool clean energy thing. And then it's just like natural gas. And I audibly gasped. I'm pretty sure I had like a soda in my mouth and did like a spit take or something, because I was like, oh my God, this is such a lie.
It is such a lie. And then of course they do things too, like they put up their billboards and they say that, we need fracked gas because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. And of course, forgetting that the sun is always shining somewhere, the wind is always blowing somewhere else. There are lots of clean and renewable energy options and technologies that are emerging all the time. There is increased battery storage options that are increasing. Their energy efficiency is a clean and renewable energy option to reduce our footprint. So all the way around, right? As you said, they just peddle these false narratives in their commercials, on TV, on the radio, on the billboards, and it's really disturbing. And so that's why I just wanted to touch a little bit. I'll probably do future fact checks on clean energy cars, because they're important. It's an important thing that people can do when you're going to buy a new car. Consider that electric vehicle option. I have found it highly, highly rewarding and successful, and I have no problem going anywhere I want to in my electric vehicle.
There you go. Dun, dun, dun. So we're going to have on shortly Michael Yadrick. If I say it wrong, he'll correct it when he hops on. But Michael does the Treehugger podcast, which is really great. Mom, you've been on it before, and he just talks about all sorts of cool topics, like Green Amendment. That's my favorite episode. But all these different kind of like plant topics, biodiversity. I don't even know. You just have to look. Like, the titles are so cool on all the episodes. So I think for anybody that's just kind of immersing themselves into environmental activism, into a tree hugger lifestyle, into just trying to figure these things out, I definitely go recommend. He has an Instagram. He has go to treehuggerpod.com, and that's where you'll see his podcast, and we'll link it in the description. But yeah, that is our guest for the day.
And make sure you get the website right, treehuggerpod.com. Don't just go to treehugger.com, because they'll take you to the wrong place.
Hi, Michael.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm all right. Hi, Maya.
Hi, good to see you again. The tables have turned.
You again, I know.
we do like a little quick primer of our guests before they get on, but we never want to shortchange people because guests always have really interesting ways they describe themselves and things to say. So if you wanted to give yourself your own little hype up, your own little intro, go for it.
I'm not used to being on the other side. I'm so grateful for the invitation. My name is Michael Yadrick Jr. I'm a professional tree hugger. I think we'll talk about that later on. But I am, let me see, how do I introduce myself? I'm a son to Michael and Nancy. I was born in Seattle, husband to Rena, and I'm also father of an 11-year-old named Miles. We have two dogs, a new puppy just joined us like a week and a half ago. So Hazel joined Lucky, so that's our family. We live in Tacoma, aka Grit City, Washington, which is on the ancestral homelands of the Puyallup people as well as the Stilichum tribe. But I am calling you. I'm zooming in today to you from Seattle. I'm actually at work. You can see my mess. I think you can see the mess of my office behind me. So I'm calling in from Seattle, where I work as I trade my labor for a paycheck at the city of Seattle Parks and Recreation Department as one of the plant ecologists, and I support Green Seattle Partnership, which is an effort to restore the forested parks in the city of Seattle.
Oh, that's really
I'm
cool.
actually going to physical therapy a little later, so I know it's very much on the forefront of my mind. I'm an injured mountain runner.
Oh my gosh.
What
Yeah.
is a mountain runner,
Yeah.
Michael? We weren't actually going to start there, but now
Oh, were you? Okay.
gotta ask that. That sounds
I
really
mean,
hard.
for years, probably right before my son was born, probably going back to my time, I lived, where did I start running? Started running in graduate school, I guess, and just as a way to like run off steam. And then, yeah, and then when we moved back, I guess when I moved to California, I was living in Southern California for a while. I was working for Palos Verdes Peninsula Land Conservancy, and I lived, yeah, in these kind of rolling hills of South Los Angeles, and that's where I really picked up trail running. And then subsequently, when we moved back to the Salish Sea Puget Sound area, yeah, I just started running like crazy. And I started running like longer and longer distances, like beyond the marathon, and then mostly up in there's beautiful foothills in the mountains here, just really great spots. And yeah, as a way to it would always like clear my mind, and it was good for my body until it wasn't until until I just kept, 'cause it's so logical just to keep running on an injured hamstring for years.
Well, that is crazy. I guess I go to law school in Vermont. So I see people like run into the mountains. I'm just like, they're crazy people. Like I
Yeah,
can't
they're
even
like, where
run
are
like
they coming back? Who knows?
yeah. Some of them, most of them. We don't talk about the ones that don't. But I feel like that's, so you said you're a professional tree hugger. So what,
Yeah.
that's like your podcast name. So what does that mean? What is a professional tree hugger?
Well, it was kind of a moniker. Is that the correct term? Yeah, it's kind of given to me by my dad. So I was saying I spend a good amount of time with my dad, but my mom pretty much raised me, and so and then yeah, we're very much closely in touch. We're actually closer now than we were when I was really growing up, I guess. But yeah, I work as a plant ecologist for the last 11 years at, City of Seattle. Before that, I was like a conservation director or something at some land trusts. So I had these different like professional titles, career titles, and he never quite knew what I did. Like it's you're like a family of attorneys, right? Like you kind of know what each other are doing, right? But my dad just he never is quite figured. I think he's almost got it figured out, but sometimes he's just generally like I'm sort of an environmentalist, and he knows and he sends me information a lot of times about like solar energy and like composting toilets and electric vehicles and all this stuff. He's like, "You're into this, right?" I'm like, "No, not well, kind of, but not really, like tangentially."
Mhm.
But he's like, "Mostly I'm a plant person." like a people person, but I like plants and things like that. So that's basically where it came from. Because I think I love the name of I think I get it, the name of your y'all's podcast, right? That's funny.
Yeah,
I was
sure.
no, it
It
makes
was a
sense.
long time trying to
Uh,
figure out what we
Did,
were
did,
going to do.
did it? I know. So, but tree hugger, because there is like, I think there may be other like variations on the name tree hugger and podcasts out there, but that's what I went with.
Well,
But and I know that you all, and it means kind of something to me because I'm into trees. But I think it is one of these things that it is used in sort of a like a kidding fashion or a derogatory fashion a lot of the times, or
Mm-hmm.
kind of offhandedly we may refer to ourselves as tree huggers. I think Annika, I listened to a couple episodes. I heard you say it once.
Yeah.
I don't know if you
I'm a
remember,
tree hugger.
but
I'm like, yeah.
yeah, and it's one of these things like I think you just kind of I don't take it as a slight anymore. I can't. It's one of those things like people probably don't say to your face a lot of the time, but
Yeah.
well,
I've
it's
sort of taken pride in
interesting.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that's the thing is I think that for a long time it was used, just like you said, as a disparaging remark. And I think that people like you and us sort of don't view it as a disparaging remark and have gone
Yeah.
to, just taken the word back. Because I mean, Annika and I literally, like, since she was a little girl, when we would, walk down to the shop together, sometimes I would just feel a tree talking, and we give the tree a kiss and we give the tree a hug, and it's a good thing.
I feel like I make a
Right.
thing out of it. I did on Valentine's Day, or like anytime there's like these Instagram trends, or like post like the love of your life, or post the one that means most to you. I have a cache of photos. Like I make a point of getting photos of me hugging trees, and that's just what I
Nice.
post. And I'm just like, this is it, man. And I love it. And you can like, yeah, people in like national parks I've gone to clearly like staring, like, what are you doing? And I kind of wish almost like, sometimes I do it obviously for the bit. Like, yeah, people call me a tree hugger as an insult, but it's actually like very calming, and it's very like good for you.
It is good for you. I think the energy resonates at the Schumann resonance, of the earth. I think it's got to be good for you. It can't be bad for you, I guess. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but it does have some history, and I think, you all kind of going back. I am 45, so I was born in 1976. I think in the May, it's kind of different. I see a lot of different things written about it, but I should probably do an episode on this now because there is some the origins of the term are kind of born from the Chipko movement in India, right? So in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there's different things written about it, but maybe 1973. I actually do a little podcast research, and so I heard an interview with Vandana Shiva, and she was actually part of the Chipko movement in India. I didn't realize, but she's one of my heroes.
Wow.
And she talks about in 1973 was like one of the official movements or where this certain area in the Himalaya, in this post-colonial period of India, there was a lot of changes in the economy, and a lot of the men had left the rural villages to go to the cities to work, right? And so, but also there's a lot of industry going on, like roads were being built out to the frontier to have this like kind of secure the frontier with China, and that opened up a lot of resources extraction out of those rural areas. And so there was logging going on, and just classic sort of enclosure of the commons extension from um, England, like the history in England,
Mm-hmm.
enclosure where rural villages lose their rights, their historical like rights to the forest to use
Mm-hmm.
it, and the state essentially takes it over. And so in the same era, essentially the villagers, they had to petition the state to use the forest for something, to harvest for like tools, fire, fuel wood, etc. They were denied, but shortly thereafter, some sort of industry was granted rights to the timber for, of all things, like tennis rackets, I guess.
My
So like tennis
gosh.
rackets, all these things that wood is used for, and essentially and so there was only women in these villages, very nonviolent, and they took up the way they protected the trees was with their bodies. And so the chipko means to
Oh.
hug or to cling to in Hindi. And so that is what they did in order to protect the trees. So, in that sort of Gandhian nonviolence, but they were women, right? They're just, it's basically, their livelihood. It holds the soil. It provides all these valuable things that aren't just the textbook values that we read about for trees. So it's very beautiful. But I don't know if this is a long story. Long story
No, this
short.
is
No, this is
very
cool.
interesting.
Okay. Yeah. So
You
the
do need
Chipko
to do a
movement.
show on this, by the
I
way.
do. I'm
Yeah.
gonna dig into it some more. But yeah, and I hope I'm being coherent about it too, because but it
Hmm.
grew from that really. And then the guys got involved, and one of the gentlemen that was sort of the leader, he like really popularized it, but however it was his wife's idea. They're like it's his wife's idea. um Popularized it, and it really became like a movement in India against, yeah, just excessive logging, even the anti-dam movement. So a lot of dam construction happened in, like, I don't know, 70s, 80s ish, that era. And so, yeah, Chipko. And I think it's still going to a certain extent. However, it is, yeah, obviously, I don't know if y'all, I think we're going to do video, but audio, I don't know if y'all
Yeah.
can tell, like, I'm generally like a white guy. But yeah, so I do feel like I've sort of because I know the history, I feel like I'm sort of co-opting the term that's not from my ancestry or my cultural traditions. However, my wife is half Indian. I feel like it's been interesting to tell her about the history of it a little bit, but
Well,
she's
and
a
you
little bit
got it.
removed from that.
Yeah, but it also sounds
Yeah.
like before all that beautiful history. And by the way, I don't know if you can see all my Indian gods
Oh,
and
nice.
goddesses in the back. So I was born in India. So also like
Really?
you. Yeah. So, but very white like you. But I do feel like while it's beautiful that you looked into that history, you got your chops legitimately because you're your own version of a tree hugger, right? You're planting
I
trees,
am.
you're loving trees, and you're loving nature, and it was given it to you by your dad. So,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
that's legit.
That's right. Yeah, I did unpack it a little bit with Vivek Chandas on an episode. I don't know, I don't know what year this is, a while back. So we did this episode on urban heat islands, and about I listened to it. Yeah, I recapped it a little bit yesterday. At like minute 10, we talk about it because yeah, his family, that's where his family's from, India, I think in southern India. And we talked about it a little bit. And actually, it's funny. I don't know if anyone wants to go back to that episode, but he talks about his dad has a name for him as well, which is like totally like vague and ambiguous. Doesn't really have to do with what he does
No, that's
now. But yeah,
fascinating. Yeah,
yeah.
but that's fascinating. And that is, we do want people to go listen to your podcast because it's so cool. The diversity of shows that you have and the way
Hmm.
you get people to dig in on issues is just fascinating. And that's a really good episode.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. Honestly, I re-listened to our episode too, Maya, and I do prepare. I went on a deep dive. I feel like with out of my comfort zone. I think, and just some research about our rights and constitutionality. And you taught me some things. And actually, you've sort of I've sort of cultivated my mistrust of government to a certain extent because of you, maybe. Like, you've driven me more towards like my anarchist tendencies, I think. So,
Well,
like,
welcome.
seriously. Oh
Welcome
my
to
God. And you
welcome
act
to our side of the line.
Yeah, great. I do remember, I will be a little vulnerable here. When I was editing, I cry every once in a while, like when I'm editing, because people say such like gorgeous things. And I remember, I think it was the cold intro that I did with you, maybe at the beginning of the episode. You said something. It was just like, I could just imagine you, like, I don't know, outside, like just yell, like, or just like doing your activist thing and like with the wind in your hair and just like screaming these words or whatever. It's
That's so
amazing.
nice
So
of you.
yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. I do. I do. I do. So, well, so how do you, so, when you were talking about, well, what is it, on your, I don't think you called yourself this today, but you describe yourself as a certified ecological restoration practitioner.
Yes.
What is that?
What is that?
Besides
So that
being a certified tree hugger.
that is right. Yeah, professional tree hugger is like yeah, and it's not a it's not a real certification. It's like street cred, I guess, more than anything. Maybe
Which is the
I
best
don't know.
cred.
Yeah, so certified ecological restoration practitioner. I've only had that title for like maybe at most 2 years. So it's a new certification program that was created by the Society for Ecological Restoration, and so that is one of my professional affiliations. It's kind of like my practical sort of academic home, I guess. So the society was created in 1988 to sort of help define or shape the new field of ecological restoration. And yeah, I actually did an episode with Bethany Walder, who's the current executive director, again a while back in the Wayback Machine. And yeah, there's like 3,000 members, so not a lot of people, over like in like 70 countries around the world. So it is like very much and I would say 65-70% of the members are in North America, and the rest are spread across the world. So it is like it's an evolving sort of multicultural institution.
One of the things, Michael, that just, seeing, listening to your podcast and seeing the kinds of things that you write about and you talk about, that you have a really beautiful focus, maybe not entirely, but, that a part of your focus really is the urban areas and bringing natural landscapes and trees into the urban community, which seems to cover sort of all your buckets that you just talked about: environmental justice, climate disruption, right? Everything. And so just wondering, if you want to talk a little bit about what you actually do in terms of, why do you focus on the urban area? Why is that important?
Right. Yeah, I would say first and foremost, it's my ecosystem, right? So I'm an urban dweller. Like I've really always, I was born in Seattle. I grew up in Federal Way, which is just south of us, um, and which was pretty rural when we moved there, but kind of quickly as I grew up became suburban, like a very major suburb of Seattle. And then again, I went to college. I went to the Evergreen State College in Olympia, and that was like a little more rural. But except for my time really in Latin America, when I spent time as I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer from Bolivia, and then also spent some time in graduate school in Costa Rica and Guatemala. Aside from those times in Latin America, I pretty much have always lived in urban areas. So yeah, so for me, and yeah, I've gravitate towards urban areas, and for some reason I have this romantic idea that someday I will live in Vermont, not Vermont. I probably won't live. I'll probably always stay West Coast, but yeah, some mountains and because I do like the mountains. Like I imagine I just want to run out my door and go up the mountain or jump in the lake or whatever. But again, I think most of us are urban. Most of the world lives urban, right? So I feel like it's yeah, nature just isn't out there in the mountains I can see from the city. It's yeah, nature is sort of all around us. Um, and who kind of reinforced that with me? There was an early episode I did with Julia Plevin talking about forest bathing, and that episode started. I picked up I sort of like knew about forest bathing. I didn't know what it was, but we were on vacation in Los Angeles and went to this gift shop, and her book was just sitting there, kind of like sitting like couched between like kind of these statues that are behind Maya. They're like, it was like that sort of bookstore. Like just a lot of different things, like eclectic variety of things you could purchase there. But our book was there, and had this flight back to Seattle, so I bought it and started reading it, and I was like, well, I have a podcast, and I'm in this position now where I feel like it's a very much a good excuse to reach out to people and it gives me this positionality that I have now and the power. I can just reach out to people and be like, hey, do you want to have a conversation, instead of just being some rando, that emails, that kind of lurks around and creeps around and tries to want to talk to people. I was like, I'm like legit, it adds some legitimacy, I guess, to my hobby. So I don't know if I answer your question, but yeah, I do think the urban ecology is important because yeah, the urban areas can be kind of a drain and can be somewhat degrading to our ecosystems and damaging to our ecosystems. For example, um, yeah, just thinking about the orca populations here in the Puget Sound, and I don't know if we talked about whales with Maya, but talking about the river keeper, bay keeper concept when we chatted last time. But what's the charismatic fauna that we see here in the Puget Sound? I'm pointing this way because the water's over here. Yeah, like the salmon, haven't been here since time immemorial, and the orcas, and for example, and sometimes the resident populations of orcas are suffering because of what we do on the land. So how we treat the land, it also affects the waters and things we can't see underwater. And so, and always having lived, not always, but kind of mostly of my life living around water, it's the health of the Puget Sound is very important, even though we don't spend much time in it or on it. A lot of people don't spend much time in it or on it. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, and I think one of the cool things, just what you're talking about too, with your conversation about urban environments and like, yeah, this we don't see what's under the water, which I think is like just such a great metaphor in general for the environmental movement and like activists. Like we're kind of almost dunking our heads under the water to like tell everybody else on the surface, like, hey, you guys might want to check this out because it's not good. But what has it been like with the people that you've gotten to talk to and your different guests? And I guess like one of the things we're always talking about is how last week we had a guest on, Byron Riggins, talking about how like learning about nature and being involved in nature has had such an impact on his life and for other people too. And if like maybe from your guests or the conversations you've had as you've been on this tree hugger podcast journey, like what you've kind of taken from people that are getting those benefits from nature, and maybe also the detriment for people that aren't able to get that.
Yeah. Yeah, I really hope that conversations are sort of reciprocal and the relationships. Sometimes it's like I could have never have seen Maya again, really. It's like sometimes it's just like very brief. We have the conversation and then we just go our separate ways. But I do hope, I don't know, some of these people I have like very fond memories of some of these folks, and I hope I've learned a lot from them. And sometimes I do feel like I have just like received so much love and so much, they've informed me so much about how I should reorient how I view the world and how I perform my practice of restoration, really. So I would say, and even the future guests, like I have some great people coming on, I think the next few months, but just thinking back to, a few months back, like Candice Fujikane, who's a professor at University of Hawaii, and she wrote this book called Mapping Abundance, and just talking about what capitalism has done to us, and like kind of just parcelize the world, like really starting with enclosure, parcelize the world and made us kind of certainly like wage slaves to a certain extent, and just how we just keep chopping things up into smaller and smaller pieces, like subdividing things, and then all of a sudden that little piece that is really part of a larger landscape, like isn't really, it loses some value. I mean, it's like it creates surplus for someone, probably not us, but um, but it divides like watersheds and whatnot. So just thinking about, but out when you look out there, and like when I go into an urban forest, it has been quote unquote kind of damaged, in my viewpoint to a certain extent, but it really does. And even when it's covered in like quote unquote weeds, like it is still like it made me switch my thinking a lot more, just thinking about this area is abundant. I mean, it's green, it is abundant. Like there are some like some threats, like kind of as we define things from what the Western scientific perspective, but like things are growing, and even in deserts. So, and then looking back at the episode, like one of the earlier episodes, we talk about biocrust ecology in the desert. And I've always been pretty much lived around forests, but actually when I was in the Peace Corps in Bolivia, we lived in this kind of higher elevation, like it was really kind of a very arid area in the desert. So I kind of came to appreciate the desert. And deserts, people use these terms like food deserts or whatever, but people have like lived in the desert for like eons, and so you think of a desert as like place that's like not abundant, but when in reality there's so much life, and sometimes it is under, you're not seeing it because you're not tuned in to to what's there,
Wow.
so because you
That's
have
a
different values.
Yeah, that's a really great observation. And I hadn't thought about it that way, right? About how people think about terms. And then, as you said, it's all about your perspective. Do you think when you do your restoration work, or even just, or others are doing it in the urban area, how quickly do you think people start to experience, and I'm thinking particularly of children, but really it's everybody, how quickly do you think people start to experience the positive values that come from bringing trees and life back into an urban area? And do they realize, like, when do they realize intellectually versus emotionally that something has changed in not just their landscape, but their lifescape because of the addition of these plantings or this restoration project that you've helped marshal and bring forth?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think people recognize, like, there's this recognition, I think, around town anyway, through my experience at the city of Seattle, like anything green is good. It's like really like people, like you fly. I don't know if I think of flying because I don't know if anyone has the privilege of flying into Seattle SeaTac Airport or something. You fly, a lot of times you get this, if you can look down on things like, um, or if you look on Google, I guess, like look at the landscape imagery on Google. This is the way I think about the world. Sometimes I fly. I don't know where you all are, but I like fly there in my brain and like in like a Google map. So like I don't know if you're in New Mexico or wherever. I'm like flying there, and but SeaTac, this area is fairly well forested, right? And I mean, quickly. The footprint, there's like 6 million people that live between Thurston County and Snoqualmie, or the Snohomish County, in this like megalopolis, I guess, of around Puget Sound. So there's a good amount of people, and it's fairly gray. Actually, you can see. I don't know if y'all can see this. There's you can see like this is a poster. I have
Yeah.
all this like weird stuff for my office, but you can see like how was it the way Puget Sound was in 1972, and the black is like, I don't know if you can see this. Can you really see this?
Yeah, we
The
see a little
black
bit.
is like
Yeah.
Yeah, we
the
can
urban
see it.
area, that sort of impervious surfaces, and the green is
Yeah.
forest. And then in 1996, when there was an urban forest canopy analysis done, you can see how much it had grown by the late 90s. And then you think now we're like, I don't know what, I can't do math, 30 years later or whatever, and how different, how much the impervious surface has grown, how much forest canopy we've lost. So yeah, so I think, yeah, green is good regardless of what kind of plant it is. But trees, our program was created we're in year 17, and the whole, you can really think of the origin of the Green Seattle Partnership anyway, was all about kind of decreasing the sort of threats and always like maintaining canopy, like planting more trees, maintaining forests, because it's like our lifestyle, it's our culture. um, where the Pacific Northwest is home to, like, the biggest and, some of the best trees really in my mind. And so like big Douglas firs and like big Western red cedars, and why not have them in the city? So subsequently to all these, this urban forest canopy analysis, like pretty much the natural areas, the greens, the kind of wilder places in the city are still largely forested. Like some trees are older and they fall down, but we're very fortunate to have been blessed with some public funding as well as some leveraging, some grant, private monies in order to keep it going. And it is I say one of the more robust or bigger urban forestry programs in the United States, I would say. Other cities do it well too, and we're sort of loosely networked. But yeah, I think kids and then so we have tried to create this culture of stewardship, and like pre-COVID, like almost any given day you can find an event to like go hang out at. So in some ways, like it doesn't require, the program is set up so it doesn't require me to be there leading an event. Like I'm just sort of this term is antiquated, but I'm sort of like more like, in some ways I'm kind of like the quarterback. Like I'm here like
I don't know if you can
supporting.
use, come
Yeah,
on, you
I don't
cannot
know.
use like
I
brain
know.
damaging quarterback terminology with
I know.
healthy
I'm like,
trees.
yeah, I know. I'm like
That's
Russell
my
Wilson.
biases in
I'm
there.
Russell Wilson. I'm sort of scrambling around, like supporting people, and we just support people with tools. Like the one thing is like people need tools. They need a place. They need a place. Obviously, they need tools. They need some materials, like plants, and then they know what to do. Like they don't need me there with my certification, to tell them what's up, because people, I mean, there's always things to learn, and I'm learning continuously, but they do it themselves, right? So, and that's the cool part of the model that we have created. There's definitely some flaws to it, but it's somewhat beautiful. But yeah, that's the thing. I think in the urban areas, the values, besides like the textbook values, it's the value nearby nature. A lot of the times it is just a trail, and getting into it. So if that trail is covered or is creepy, there's a difference between, like, I'm like I said, older white guy, likes to run the mountains. Like I can creep through any weird urban forest. Like I feel totally comfortable. But most people, like, you look at a trail that's really narrow, like just a single track, you call it single track, that's that's not really accessible for a lot of other people. So we make it a little wider, 4 feet narrow, and then just just manage sort of the vegetation so it's not just present, and like sometimes you don't have to duck, and that makes it so much more walkable for people. But the other thing about the territory here in Seattle is, like, there's water. The topography is very sharp in some cases, so there's a lot of like staircases or trails through the parkland that allows people to live their lives. Like they can walk to transit, they can walk to school. Otherwise, if they don't cut through the park, they got to walk like a mile around on the sidewalks or no sidewalks, right? So those are some of the different things that the way that comes into our mind, the way we our relationship with forest in the urban areas, that might not be something that another restorationist really kind of comes on their radar out in the more rural areas.
I think that's so cool. And I think that's like so many things that people just don't think about. Like people don't think about even just how, when you look at a trail, like, yeah, if it's not a certain width, if it's not well kept for many people, that like maybe that creates an issue that I don't think everybody thinks about. And I definitely I don't think sometimes, like, even as environmentalists, like we necessarily think about that, because we're just like, oh, nature, let's go. Like I don't understand why not everybody else is like, let's go. But sometimes it does require a little bit of extra zhuzhing, if you will.
It does, yeah.
I was at I was giving a talk somewhere and there were different panels, and the panel before me, it was this very somebody talking about the physically disabled and their access to natural areas, and it was a combination of how many limitations there are. And it's not just being in a wheelchair, right? It can be that there are all kinds of physical limitations that people have that can make nature not accessible. And then on the flip side, you know, we were battling against a quarry expansion, and it was going to destroy a forest. And this forest was the one place where this mother brought in her quadriplegic son. And this was the forest where she would take her son, and there was access, and he would just like bathe in nature. And this was his special natural space that this quarry was going to be allowed to destroy. And so it wasn't just destroying the forest, but it was destroying this one person's access, her son's access to the natural world. And he had so many limitations as it was, and just how just devastating that was going to be for him. So I think that this issue, as you said, access for the physically abled, and the idea of being able to walk through rather than having to walk around, and that's so important. But yeah, there are so many other kinds of people in our world, and making sure we think about them and giving them access to is just irreplaceably important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it is just important to listen to other people, right? Because I could be like, you know, and my mistakes of mine, taking responsibility and really being accountable. Like 5 or 10 years ago, I'd be like, this trail's fine, you know, this trail's fine, but really being able to really listening to people, because obviously I mean, I tag team my partners, or you know, a couple doors down the trails program, and that's like they have these standards, and the standards sort of exist for certain, you know, reasons, so people can like get, there's like called the window of the forest, right? So we walk through kind of safely and feeling secure. um and because a lot of folks in urban areas too, um yeah, they just feel like I could probably maybe feel a little more disquiet like walking through an alley, you know, and like the scary things that exist there at night when it's dark. And that's my thing. But someone else, yeah, walking through the forest could get that same sort of like that psychological trigger that, yeah, it's time to run or not go that way because it looks the way it does. So, and did people, especially from different cultures that are new here as immigrants or refugees have fled here, you know, I think it can be important. Their relationship with this type of forest is different from where they came from, and so there's just a lot of listening to do, honestly. And so it's not just physical. I think we talk about physical access, and not to bring this back to my hamstring, but I'm still like quite physically like capable, right? Like I'm able-bodied, but yeah, there's physical access, being able to get into the space, but there's also like different forms of access that I think are important in kind of political ecology. They talk about like social access, or like political access, right? So people, like our volunteers, let's say, like as the landowner, as the municipality, as the bureaucracy, we sort of have the ultimate sort of ownership and right. And I'm going to use these attorney words, you could correct me, but like we have like kind of dominion over like the park system, like the 5,000 acres or whatever. And we sort of, there's some rules that people engage with, like in the urban forested parks, and some things are not allowed, right? So like after hours, like drinking, you know, partying in the woods is frowned upon. I had a meeting just last night about a new park, and this new park is kind of waiting for a project to happen, and it's in this urban creek, and some people who are experiencing homelessness have set up camps there. So it's actually not just one camp, not just one person, but it's a community of homeless folks that are living there, and so that is like physically they're accessing the area, but a lot of the neighbors don't want anything to do with it, right? So, and we talk about, you know, as we talk about environmental justice and kind of who's most marginalized within our community, yeah, it's one of those things. I think in Seattle, many urban areas are going through it, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why it's happening. But some people if they're not the if they're not housed, like if there's housing insecurity, some people are living in our forests, and there's a lot of tension right now. And we think about, I think about that access, and then what we value in our urban forests. And I can totally see the necessity for someone who, and I think our forests are very pleasant. Like if I didn't have a house, forests are somewhat of a, safe haven, I think, for some people. But it is, uh, it's very disquieting for a lot of the neighbors because they think it is unsafe. And there were like 70 people at this meeting, and probably like 60 of them stayed later just to talk about the homelessness crisis in the city, in this very microcosm of this one little baby park.
Did
And
they want to,
yeah.
I'm just curious, did they, the most of the people that came up to comment, was the thought process to continue to make space in the park for the homeless, or was the thought
No,
process to
most
move
of the
them?
time, no, most of the time it's like people just, I think most of my, I don't want to, I want to generalize or stereotype, but yeah, most people just don't want to see it, and don't want to really, they just want this city essentially to just deal with it. And I think that means for it to go away, right? So when we think about these, frontline communities, fence line communities, I think, I also generally consider, I feel like I don't have much control over it because I mostly just responsible for weeds and trees, in my job.
Mhm.
But it sort of, it unsettles me, and I don't know how to always navigate it. But it is, yeah, it's something that, we'll have to confront as communities, as
It
moving
is,
forward.
yeah, it is, I mean, it's so sad and challenging that you have to deal with that and are going to have to figure it out. But on the flip side, there's something beautiful about the fact that when these people had nowhere else to go, they came to the urban forest.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely people camping in the margins. It's like just the margins of our cities, and so like in the most, I think, uncomfortable places too. And like, but they do. A lot of people tend to like sleep outdoors on their own, but yeah, they tend to kind of come together in communities. And so I think there's some wonderful things that some other municipalities are doing, to to continue to provide services, and also try to get people into more stable situations. But it's I don't know. It's a huge issue.
I just think it's sad too, just like speaking to homelessness and stuff, and people advocating that they wouldn't want homeless people in the park. And it's not like for a, I don't want homeless people in the park because then I can't enjoy the nature. It's like it's this unsightly thing, and I think we have the issue with in our yard because it's native plants and it's not a manicured lawn. People are like, well, we don't like it because it's not pretty, and it's people, but people also don't think about the nature that they want the way to look isn't actually taking care of nature, it's hurting it. And I find so much unfortunate synergy between people that don't care for their fellow human, also don't seem to care for the environment. And I like, it's just, and I think that's a perfect example of like, those people aren't caring for the nature who are like advocating to remove the homeless people when like, yeah, it's a place that they found that's safe.
Hmm. Yeah, and especially in these times, there's lots of things we could talk. This could be a whole
I know this
discussion
is
too
like,
about, yeah, how I didn't
it's
expect it to go this way, but it's just my recent experience like last night.
but it's
So it came to
beautiful. It's
mind. Yeah.
just you're talking about how you work so hard to find different ways to think about and make the urban forest accessible to people. I think it's just it's a fascinating subject, but I think it's beautiful. It's how your brain works,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
like
right.
even more cool.
Yeah. And historically too, you look at our like origin story, and a lot of times it's like we do this for like the birds and the wildlife and all these things. And there is that. Like there's, people that think like the parks are just for the, like, and that's sometimes where the funding comes from. And there's like very bullet points when you apply for, state monies. It's like there can be no buildings here. There can only be certain things. Like, this is not for a playground. These are not for kind of active restoration. This is, supposed to be like habitat. So because we've lost so much, which is like valid. And so there are like coyotes and bald eagles and what did we see yesterday? Yeah, towies and yeah, they're holding hands and yeah, hopefully, in the forest. But yeah, the people component, the
What's a
urban area is
towie? What do
definitely.
you
Oh,
mean
a towee
towies
is like
holding
a
hands?
bird. Yeah, towee. I saw like because birds are coming back, like migrating in, so we're
Yeah.
seeing new birds at the bird feeders and whatnot. So I was on a site visit yesterday, and it's like there's like just a new bird. All of a sudden, we had seen for a while. Towee, I don't know. I'm a plant person. I don't know. It's like a um brownish reddish body and like a black head. I don't know.
And
It's
it was
weird.
holding hands with
No,
another
I
towie.
was like,
Oh, okay.
I make this joke about bald eagles holding hands with orcas. Like that's like the stuff that wins monies so you can acquire, so you can do like conservation projects. You like paint this like pretty picture of harmony and like charismatic fauna and everything. So sorry, that came out sideways.
No, that's fascinating though. Again, it just shows how your brain works, which is like
I
way
know. So
cool.
no one
Way
understands my
cool.
jokes.
Now,
So
you
random.
mentioned the salmon earlier, and you were talking about, the Native American communities, and I actually tying it all back together. I wonder if you know that there is actually now a Washington Green Amendment proposal by Representative Deb Lacanoff, right? She's a Native American, speaks so beautifully and powerfully about the salmon and their history with Native American cultures and how sad it is, their current status. And then her complement on the Senate side is Senator Mona Das, which is also like an off the charts powerhouse of a woman. So didn't know if you've ever encountered either of them, but they're both like amazing women, in your state, and they're the ones advancing the New Mexico Green Amendment. And then we have
Washington Green Amendment.
The Washington Green Amendment, sorry. And then and David Kipnis with 350 Seattle is our leadership partner in advancing the Green Amendment in that state. So I didn't know if you had that on your radar, but I wanted to put it on your radar
I
because
did not
really
know.
powerful voices.
I mean, I do lurk around your social media, so like I knew you had a podcast, and I didn't think I was gonna be a guest, but then I did know about these things. But I feel like New Mexico has been really like your pride and joy, and where you've been supporting. Like
No,
seems
well,
like much more advanced, right? Is that
it's
not
well,
right?
the thing is it is what happened in New Mexico is New Mexico had just this 30-day window. And so it was very intense engagement for 30 days. That's when their legislature was in session. And then it's sort of like different states happen at different times. And in Washington state, there was the proposal and there was a hearing. But, we knew strategically that this was probably going to be a longer lived process. And so, there was great engagement around the time, but it was much more short-lived because it was really around the time of this hearing. But now we're going to be gearing up for next year with our legislative champions and our leaders. So, but that's cool that you noticed that New Mexico is up there. Hawaii is very hot right now. New Jersey's getting very hot right now, and Delaware State's getting hot, and Maine is super hot too.
Hot. Okay.
Super hot.
Good to know. Good to know.
In a good way, not a climate crisis kind of way.
I mean, it is hot, but it's hot. That's cool. Yeah, I'll look up these folks. Deb.
Yeah, I mean, they would be
Mona.
like Representative Lacanoff and Senator Dawes, man, and just powerhouse legislative leaders that you have there in Washington State.
I'll put some pressure on my legislators. My folks, I didn't see their names.
Yeah, but I can happily connect you up too.
Okay.
Like if you're interested, because like I said, Representative Lacanoff, when she talks about, she's Native American herself, she comes from Alaska. And so I think she's the only current Native American leader in the state legislature, and she's only the second ever to have served in the legislature. So she also just has a fascinating personal story, as well as her incredible dedication to environmental restoration and protection, which is really off the charts powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope that sounds great. Yeah, I did. I'm not familiar with her, and yeah, I'll look her up. Maybe she'll be on the podcast. That would do wonders for my podcast.
There you go. Well, so it feels like this is like a good, we always like to do, I always say about our podcast, like as we end, we talk about heavy hitting stuff. Sometimes the topics are lighter, sometimes they're heavier, but we always think it's important because the environmental message sometimes can be very like down and depressing on people, but we're always like, if you found this episode sad, then you need to get inspired. So I feel like, Michael, with
Yeah.
your podcast, help us close out here with how you maybe would say, like, what are in your own journey or whatever the takeaways of how people can be inspired to be, we always say, like, be an activist in your own right.
Mm-hmm.
And so any
Mm-hmm.
parting thoughts you
Yeah,
have?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I totally appreciate the opportunity, to give people hope. I do feel like the living through these like kind of multiple pandemics, we've lived through, I think there's a lot of grief out there, and I think we're privileged to come back on the other side, I guess, of COVID. I don't know if we're in the middle of COVID, maybe we're at the end of COVID at this point in time, who knows? But and then with the uprisings and racial reckonings, I think it is important to kind of get comfortable with people's grief and kind of sit with it. And I think like hope, and I think Leslie Davenport, with whom I just finished an episode about talking about eco-anxiety and climate anxiety, talked about like, I think it was a quote from no, I don't know where it came from, but her saying like, perhaps like hope can come out of just these uncomfortable like feelings, and particularly grief. And so hopefully, that inspires us to, to make change and listen to each other. And I would say, just speaking and just saying that word change, I think getting comfortable with change is very important, kind of like getting in right relationship with change. I did listen to I don't know which episode it was. Somebody mentioned pleasure activism, like Adrienne Marie Brown's book.
Oh, I think
That would
so
be
we
my,
did an episode on eco
yeah,
anxiety too
yeah,
with
anxiety,
Rachel
yeah.
Dawn Davis from
Yeah.
Water
So if
Spirits.
you,
Yeah.
that would be if you can, she's my favorite author right now. So I totally encourage everyone to read Emergent Strategy or Pleasure Activism or whatever. But yeah, she's like an Octavia Butler disciple, really, and just talking about getting in right relationship with change. She has a podcast as well. If I can plug like my favorite podcast,
Go for it.
her podcast is called, she does it with her sister. It's called How to Survive the End of the World, and
Oh my.
it's not like apocalypse, like machetes and like spiked baseball bats like Mad Max style. It's like, certain cultures, certain communities are kind of living through some sort of apocalyptic conditions, right? And so there's ways that we need to get in right relationship change and with each other. And I feel like that's and people, we don't, I think to a certain extent, we don't like change. Like, we often chase comforts, and but building resiliency, like doing hard things. And that's why I'll just bring it back to mountain running. That's why I like running in the mountains, and doing some hard things and confronting racism, or white supremacy, where it shows up in my practice of restoration. Like hard things like that will help us, build, I think, resiliency, and hopefully bring us together.
Yeah, every day when I'm having a difficult time of it, in a big way or a little way, I do try to think about those people who really are on the front lines. And, again, being an environmentalist, really on the front lines of suffering from environmental degradation. But I have to say right now too, thinking very much about the people in Ukraine, and the families that are really being beleaguered. And sort of, I begin and end every day with thinking about these people with these other struggles, as you said. And it does, it's not to diminish the hard times anybody's having, and not to diminish that, but for me personally, just to remember that if my biggest challenge is that I'm suffering knee pain when I'm trying to do some kind of exercise, man, bummer. But that's you know, I get to feel that pain, and in a way that's like, not negative, right? Like I'm alive.
Yeah.
I'm alive and I have a good life where I'm able to exercise. So, yeah. Anyway, so I hear you, and I just wanted to give voice to that. That's very much on my mind.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Annika, I'm so sorry. This blew the positive message.
Oh, was there other thing?
No,
was that not positive?
No,
I thought
that wasn't.
I thought it was, I thought that I was trying to
It
like
wasn't
bring it.
negative.
I blew it. I blew it. I was just trying to think of other people, and
I-
Annika always is good about doing the positive.
No, I mean, it's good. Like, I think it's hard being an environmentalist because and like a tree hugger, and like, it's just hard. It's hard, but it's like, I always like tell people, like, if I have a bad day, I just like live in that bad day, and like whatever I'm feeling, whatever the reason, whatever it is, you know, I never do that. Like, I don't know what the saying is, but it's like the mud, no matter where the mud hits your legs, it's like tough for anyone to walk through. So it's something like that. So like everybody, like, you know, people are like, well, my problem's not as bad, and like, yeah, but like, it's still hard. And so I'm just like, I'll live in my
good saying.
That's what I don't know what it is. It's definitely not the saying, but that's how I remember it. And like,
Okay,
I
well,
go to bed. I have my bad day. Yeah.
I mean, what I hear you saying, I think it's probably a way you protect yourself, right? It's like you sort of just sit with it, and at some point you're ready to kind of come out. And I think, just having vocabulary, I think expanding our vocabulary as well really helps. Like, I think we're just kind of limited by our words sometimes. So like, somebody calls you a bad name, or or somebody like, I actually listened to your all's episode on bullies as well, and I totally,
Oh man.
WTF, like, what do you got? I can't, you guys are heroes, really, like trying to you're still trucking after like all these like bad behavior that you have to
Well, yeah,
like,
and you know
live
what?
through.
It all comes back to just when you're feeling bad, go hug a tree, because that tree will nurture your soul if you're open to it, right?
There we go.
There's the positive.
That's the positive ending.
I have some news. Well, I think why I talked about orcas too, because I just read this. My mobile device just pinged me and told me some important information. So this was an article about the last remaining southern resident orca in captivity will no longer perform at Miami Sea Aquarium.
Woohoo! Is it gonna have a good life though, or is it gonna be put in a little swimming pool somewhere?
I don't know, but that's I guess I didn't fully. I was kind of reading it off. I was multitasking.
We'll have to look up to that. Orca. Performing orca, yeah.
But this is like the so she was captured in Penn Cove in August 1970 as a young whale, and has been performing at Seaquarium ever since. Wow. So she is the sole surviving southern resident of the capture era, which killed a third of the pods. So, and if you know anything about like populations and communities of orcas in Puget Sound, they're just they're like incredible living beings. And so,
well, that sounds like a very beautiful visual, Michael.
I don't know if that was positive.
No, but the beautiful visual that we're, that abusive era is coming to an end, and that people are going to be inspired to listen to your show and go out and hug a tree in your honor. I think that would be a good thing for everybody to do. Hug a tree in the treehuggerpod.com, right? Don't forget the pod at the end, treehuggerpod.com. View of the world, and get that positive energy.
All right, Michael, thank you for joining us. And we'll have all the links and everything on how people can find you and listen to your awesome podcast in our description, and all that great stuff, so everyone can get on board with Tree Hugger Pod.
All right, we appreciate it. Well, thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah. And thank you for all your great work.
Around.
Yeah. You're awesome. And get in touch with those Washington Green Amendment people, man.
I will. I'm gonna Google it right now.
All right. Okay. Take care.
Thanks, Michael.
Bye.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Well, that was really cool. What an interesting journey of a discussion. I really appreciated that.
I think it's great. We will link to all of where you can find Michael's podcast. I know on Spotify, I think, because you're saying the names, I think it's Treehuggers '.
Okay.
Pod for anyone listening. So he's also on Spotify. We'll link to it. We'll link to the website, all that great stuff. But that was an awesome episode. And yeah, go listen. If there's a myriad of topics, you need to write a paper, you need to catch up on a topic, I think Michael's your go-to source.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting and it's inspiring, and it will open up your view of the world. And it was so great to talk to him, right? It's interesting to see how his mind works and rolls, and it's really always seeking for that really positive, that learning moment and that positive next step. So
Yeah.
It was superb to have him. Great idea, Annika, for connecting up with Michael. And it was great to reconnect with him after having done his show with him, a while back before we had our show. So great work.
So we're going to close out this episode. And as always, if you want to get involved in the Green Amendment movement, you should go to www.forthegenerations.org. If you would like to see some fun clips from our podcast on Instagram, we're at Green Jeans Pod. We are on Spotify and YouTube as well. All that fun stuff. So go check it out, donate, support, and stay inspired, kids.
All right. And adults too. Stay inspired and have a great week till our next show.
There we go. All right. Until next time.
Until next time.